Welcome back to the RinkMasters podcast. My name is Tyler Krugman. I'm going to be your host today. On the other side of the screen here is my co-host Noah.
Hello.
Hello, yeah. So today we're going to be doing our Edmonton Oilers off-season breakdown. And it just seems fitting before we go on with this, as we're talking about the Oilers. We were very saddened to hear the news of the passing of Edmonton sports legend Joey Moss. So we just want to send our condolences to his loved ones and to just everyone that has followed Joey Moss throughout his time as a sports legend in Edmonton. All right. Now, today's topic that I want to talk about, this is my rant. Noah did his rant last week about the Canucks and about the hashtag.
And I did a very good job of that, by the way.
Yeah,
at least in my opinion.
No, you did good.
So, Tyler, you have a lot to live up to this week, so I hope you can deliver.
Yeah, we'll see. I don't know. You've set the bar pretty high.
Thank you.
Yeah, so you're welcome. So today we are going to be we're talking about the Edmonton Oilers. Now, one common theme that I've really come to see on threads about the Edmonton Oilers is that they're wasting Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl's best years. Now, personally, I can understand why that is such a pressing topic for so many people because, I mean, McDavid's been in the league now for 5 years, and same as Draisaitl. Those two have definitely been spectacular, and with the way that management has mishandled assets, with more noticeably Taylor Hall, the trade 1-for-1 with the Devils for Adam Larsson, and there's been a lot of bad trades. You look at the Eberle trade, and they brought in Ryan Strome. That trade was completely lopsided and definitely didn't work out for the Oilers.
Wasn't the Griffin Reinhart trade around this right, Chiarelli area, under Chiarelli as well? Yeah, so that one was also kind of fell on its face. So
that one was not a good trade at all. And ultimately, that pick ended up being Matthew Barzal for the New York Islanders. So that definitely did not work.
I mean, they might not be able to keep him this summer. It would be poetic if he ended up in Edmonton. But, he won't. He won't. No. Sorry, Oilers fans, to raise your hopes like that and then crush them. But continue, Tyler.
Thank you. So it's just there's definitely been some dark days in Edmonton. But the topic that I want to bring about right now is I think that the Oilers are in a really good spot going forward. And so my key talking point is about patience. The key to I can't talk today. Sorry. The key to success for the Edmonton Oilers right now is patience. Now, I know that's something that's not going to be popular for Oilers fans. No, you don't want to hear about patience. You want to see this team, ready to really dominate now. And personally, I think the Oilers are close, and I'm going to go through some of their prospects here that I think in the next few short years that are really going to come in and fill those spots of need for the Oilers and really help push this Edmonton Oilers roster to full contention and to help complement Leon Draisaitl and Connor McDavid. So more noticeably, I mean, the biggest question mark that we all seen for the Edmonton Oilers is their defense. And so we have Philip Broberg and Evan Bouchard in the wings, both very highly touted defensemen. If they're the Oilers, they really need to make sure that they do not rush these two prospects. The worst thing,
agreed, for sure.
Yeah. The worst thing that the Oilers could do right now is really put too much pressure on Philip Broberg and Evan Bouchard. Right now, we see Darnell Nurse, we already see the criticism he receives by a lot of the Edmonton Oilers fan base in Edmonton. Personally, I don't have an issue with Darnell Nurse. He's a big, strong defenseman. He's extremely mobile, and he makes the right offensive plays. I will like to point out that as we're talking about patience, the thing with Darnell Nurse is typically the defensive game for a young defenseman takes a little bit longer to catch up to the NHL level. It's a lot easier to play the game offensively in the NHL as a younger player than defensively. So that's as he starts to mature and his game starts to become more well-rounded, that will, in my opinion, drastically improve and really give the Oilers a legit top 4 defenseman in Darnell Nurse. But back to Broberg and Bouchard. Those are two guys that are big, that are really good skaters, that can definitely move the puck and help to help along with the Edmonton Oilers transition game. Now we're going to look a little bit further up to the forwards.
Sorry, just a quick question, Tyler. Out of those two, which would you say has the higher ceiling at this point? Which would you say is going to be like the cornerstone guy? Like, is there going to be one? Are they going to be pretty much neck and neck in your opinion, or is one going to kind of take the lead?
I personally think that Broberg has the higher ceiling because Broberg to me has the higher, like, more elite offensive potential. Whereas I think Bouchard's going to be better as like a more well-rounded two-way defenseman. Like watching Broberg's highlights over in the SHL, his skating, I think, is probably one of the best in the Oilers organization going forward. Like that's a really big key factor for the Oilers. And right now, I mean, when you look at the defensemen that are succeeding in the NHL, these are the NHL that can bring that elite skating ability, that can move the puck at a high level, and that can create the offensive chances. We look at Miro Heiskanen in Dallas, Cale Makar in Colorado, Quinn Hughes in Vancouver, right? So these are the highly coveted defensemen that are heading in the right direction that the NHL is directing towards, right?
Yeah.
And then, moving along to the forwards, we got Tyler Benson, Raphael Lavoie, we got Ryan McLeod, Kirill Maximov, Dylan Holloway. Now, all these guys have been drafted first, second, third round. Like these are going to be players that they've been drafted to come in and play a pretty important part on the team. In my opinion, the best one out of those sets of players is going to be Dylan Holloway. For Oilers fans, I mean, the biggest question mark is who's going to be able to play with Connor McDavid. Well, I believe Dylan Holloway could very easily become that power forward to slot on the right side with Connor McDavid and really keep up with the skating level and help provide the puck skills necessary to really complement Connor McDavid. And another guy to look out for too there is Jesse Puljujarvi. Like Puljujarvi, he's been killing it over in Karpat in the Liga. He led his team in points last year. So he went from looking not so hot in his previous stint with the Edmonton Oilers going overseas. He's found his confidence again. He's looking dominant. Now, I'm not going to say that he'll be putting up those point totals when he comes back to Edmonton this year, but he's definitely you can definitely expect him to be a key contributor in the top six.
It's also different management structure. It's different coaching. Like it's almost a different team entirely from when he left. So, I mean, well, just with that in mind, I wouldn't be surprised if he had if he had just a better year than his first year. So,
well, and that's another key thing too. So, Peter Chiarelli's out of the picture. We're going to look at management as we bring up management. Ken Holland. I know there's some mixed opinions about him out in the hockey world, but the fact of the matter is he's been around the NHL for a long time, and he's proven that he can build Stanley Cup contending teams with his time in Detroit. He knows how to put a team together, and usually his mindset of being patient and not putting in players before they're ready to play has proven to be very successful. And the biggest, most recent example of that is Anthony Mantha. He is a guy that he wasn't forced into the NHL. He played in Grand Rapids for a fair amount of time. Then he comes into the NHL and he's ready. And he became instantly, a top six forward for the Detroit Red Wings. So I think for that alone, if you're an Oilers fan, you just got to trust Holland's plan and let him do his thing. And it's not like he hasn't done anything to really fix the immediate needs. We look at the free agency this year. He's brought in Tyson Barrie and Kyle Turris. Now, Tyson Barrie is going to come in. He's going to bring what the Oilers were lacking in the top four this year. He's going to be a power play quarterback. You got to think that McDavid and Draisaitl are actually really liking that.
And let's not forget with the signing of Barrie, like from what I've seen, it seems very likely that Clefbaum won't be playing this year.
No.
Or at least for a vast majority of the year. Like he could just be done, like straight up. So if he's out, that's a huge loss for the Oilers, right? Like they need to figure out somebody else to take that role. And in my mind, that's a huge part of the reason why they went after Barrie.
Oh, definitely. And that's
sorry. Yeah, I had another thing about the forwards, about the potential of some of those prospects stepping in with McDavid. The thing is, sometimes you have no idea who's actually going to be the best fit. Like, now, obviously, it wasn't, like, old enough, like at that point, to recognize all of it. But in Vancouver, like nobody expected like Alex Burrows to like fit in so well with the Sedins. But when he went there, it was just a natural fit, right? Like you don't necessarily know who it's going to be. Like you can bring in players to fill certain roles, but sometimes you just give somebody a look on the top line and then heck, they fit, right? Like
exactly.
So like I wouldn't be surprised if something like that happens at Edmonton. Like you might be surprised by who ends up being on that line with McDavid. Like it could just be somebody that you had no idea. You're like, why the heck would we put him there? But then it just works, right? Like you never know.
Well, and another good thing about that too, and I like that you brought up that example about Burrows because he was an internal option that came through the organization. Like the Vancouver Canucks didn't go out and like spend big bucks to bring in a top level free agent to try and make it work, and it proved to work out for the Canucks in that scenario. And I think it's going to be very similar for the Edmonton Oilers. They're going to want to try and work within the organization who have like players they have in the wings, guys that could potentially fit there. And to me, like that's just how you have to do it, especially right now when we're talking about the flat cap last week with Vancouver Canucks. The Oilers aren't really in the best spot to really overpay for anybody this year, or really try to like fill that hole from the free agent market or even like via trade. I think it's definitely the best avenue to work within the pipeline of what you already have.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I think we're going to see that more around the NHL. I mean, I think there's more incentive now to really just take the next few years to really just try to focus on building within. Like, not that you're going to pass up a chance if there's an opportunity to go for somebody from another team, but I don't think there's going to be the same amount of push to look externally or the same willingness to look externally necessarily if you can find somebody who can work up to that same level at a significantly cheaper price.
I totally agree with that. Another big thing about that too, right, is that we want to bring up the component of player development. Not every player is also going to necessarily develop at the same rate. And I know, like, we've already looked throughout the Oilers depth charts, Noah and I, and we've seen that there's some players that drafted around the same year and within the same draft. And some players are a little bit further along than the peers of that draft, and some are kind of a little bit behind, right? And that is completely normal. And I feel like sometimes as fans, and I know that I've fallen guilty of this, Noah's fallen guilty of this.
Never. Not once.
You totally have.
I'm just messing.
But we put too much pressure on these players, and I think a lot of the times as fans, we sit here and expect these players to just be ready like that. Right, we saw it this year.
You can't expect them to do that. Like, heck, I know as a Vancouver fan, I'm still preaching patience when it comes to Olli Juolevi. Like, it hasn't been that he's not skilled. That isn't why he hasn't jumped up to the NHL. He just keeps getting hit with injury. He just can't get to the point where the team's actually comfortable saying, yeah, you're strong enough now to come up into the NHL. Like, I think that's the biggest thing that's held him back is injury rather than skill. Like, I wouldn't consider him a bust unless he just can't crack the roster over the next few seasons. Like, I mean, as we talked about with Darnell Nurse, isn't he like 25 now?
He's like 25, yeah.
Yeah, so like he can still develop and like can keep to mature. So Olli Juolevi's at least a few years younger, isn't he? Like 22 now.
I want to say he might be 23.
Okay, yeah. Even still at 23, like, especially since I know we predicted he'd probably be up in the lineup this year. So, just with that in mind, like, I think if you're an Oilers fan, like, you just need to, just be patient with some of your players, right? Like, I mean, you've already had how many like first overall picks recently, and like you still haven't competed because it seems like you just keep trying to rush to get there. So just take your breath and then you'll build a super team again. It'll be the 80s. Yeah.
Well, and the other thing that's really good about that, if you have the Oilers, when it comes to the point of having McDavid and Draisaitl, it really isn't going to take that much to really put you there. Like, they've already shown glimpses of it this year. with those two guys. So you just got to let everyone else just catch up, and then it's going to click. And another thing I want to say too is Kyler Yamamoto. Like for the past few seasons, things weren't looking too good. Like people were getting a little like antsy, I could see, and some people had already written him off. And I was like, I mean, he's still quite young. And we see him this season. He gets called up. He fits perfectly on that second line with Nugent Hopkins.
I believe he was a
Draisaitl.
point to game.
Yeah,
right?
he was,
or something like that. Yeah, he was.
Yeah,
he was very close to it if he wasn't. So,
and
yeah, he was extremely good.
He was, and it seemed like he was a perfect fit at that point too, right? So that's just another thing I want to point out. And I just think that was only half a year there for Yamamoto, if I'm not mistaken. So this next season will be a full season with Yamamoto in the lineup, and just more chance to see what he's going to be able to do. And I mean, Caleb Jones took strides this year in his development into more of a full-time NHL defenseman. Ethan Bear definitely took huge steps forward this year. So you can only imagine how much, like, what he's going to do within the next couple seasons, if how many more steps up he's going to be able to take. And I mean, goaltending, like right now, I think that could be maybe the most controversial position for the Oilers, other than maybe the defense. Like Koskinen to me is not a true number one guy, but to me, he is a guy that he can be the 1B in a 1A, 1B situation. And when he has another goaltender of equal value pushing him for starting minutes, that's when you're going to get the most out of Mikko Koskinen. Now, it very much reminds me of the situation the Islanders had a couple years ago when they had Halak and Greiss. Those two guys pushed each other, and they both were playing some of their best hockey for the New York Islanders in that competition. And I guess you can maybe say somewhat this year as well between Greiss and Varlamov this year, but maybe Noah can elaborate a little bit on that. He seems to really like the goaltending competition in the NHL.
Oh, well, I just love goaltending in the NHL because this year it was really a carousel. That's for sure. And everybody's moving around. Also, it's such a weird position. I know, like, I'm not a goalie in hockey, but I'm a goalie in soccer, and it's just so weird. Like, nobody else understands like what it's like being in net. Like, it's just totally different. Everything's different, mentality, mindset. So, I mean, I know for me, like, competition's really important, right? Like, you need somebody to actually push you, and I think that that's what's going to happen in more places around the league this year, but also lots of tandems and places are getting totally blown to bits. Like, I mean, in Chicago, right, you had Corey Crawford, he's gone, and it looks like they're just going to be going with a bunch of the kids, like going young in net, going inexperienced. So we'll see how that works out, right? I mean, you could make the argument that it's a bunch of people who aren't as good pushing each other to get better. So you could have like a relatively meteoric rise from somebody. Who knows? That could happen. Or you could be like a total flop of a campaign in that for the Hawks, right? I think that when it comes to the Oilers, though, with Mike Smith, it was a familiarity thing. I think that he knows the organization knows him. He can still like start a decent amount of games. He can still play all right when called upon. I think that's basically just what it was. Like, I think it was just they didn't want to like upset the roster more than they had to. Like, they only made like a few extra signings. Like, it's almost the identical roster to last season by the looks of it. So I mean, with that in mind, I think that's really good for the Oilers, especially if you're preaching patience. Right? If you're preaching patience, you should also have some amount of familiarity with your team in any given season. Right? Like, I know Tyler and I have been talking about a lot, just in sports in general, how there's always the tendency to want to blow up a team if something goes wrong. But sometimes you just got to wait, right? Like, sometimes you just got to wait and see, and just kind of hope the players develop. Like, if I remember correctly, I was reading something, I think it was last month, about, I think it was Steve Yzerman in Detroit, about how at the start, like, that Detroit team did not look like it could compete, kind of like the Maple Leafs. It was comparing the Red Wings to the Maple Leafs. That's what it was. And it was kind of talking about how he wasn't really considered somebody you could like get gritty, like get dirty, like against the boards, like do enough to win in the playoffs. And then it was kind of getting to the boiling point of okay, are we ditching him or are we keeping him, right? Like, what are we doing with this team? And then they figured it out, right? And it was kind of talking about that with Toronto. Like, you might just need to let the core just kind of give them a few more seasons. Like, they could really pan out here. Like, don't get too
impatient.
Don't get too rash, right? And I think that's going to be kind of same for Edmonton right now. I think that's what Holland is doing, is he's kind of saying, listen, like, yeah, it sucked that we got knocked out by the Blackhawks and the return to play thing, but it was way after the regular season, right? Like,
yeah,
it was after quite a long time off. So let's just try to stay the course a little bit. Let's not get too let's not go too over the top, right? Like, we got some good pieces. Let's not blow them. So,
well, and another thing that you brought that up too, where it sucks for them. They got knocked in the play-ins to Chicago,
which I predicted. I knew Chicago would at least get at least one win. I predicted they would get two, but Tyler, I'm sorry, man. I have to throw you under the bus, Tyler. I won that prediction.
You did.
Yeah. I was a firm believer in the Blackhawks in that one. I'm like, they have the experience. They've been off for a long time. Like, they'll be tired after the first round if they make it through, and they were. They lost to Vegas pretty convincingly. Yeah. But like, they had just enough to get past the Oilers. So I'm sorry, Oilers fans, but I did have to kind of bet against you guys in that one.
I did say that I would have to eat crow if I got that wrong, because I was so confident that I had it right.
Yeah. And, for those of you who don't know, Tyler was so confident in it. He called me full of crap at one point for saying that Chicago would stand a chance in that series. So yeah.
It's true. It is very true. And it proved that I was wrong. And where I went wrong was I overvalued the depth signings that the Oilers had brought in. You could maybe argue that Mike Green not playing definitely hurt them a little bit, because he's got a whole bunch of experience they could have definitely brought to the locker room. But regardless, they didn't have the right pieces in place to really put themselves ahead of the Blackhawks, and that's where I went wrong on that one. Yeah, unfortunately. But yeah, and so just going on ahead with that, the Oilers really are in a better spot than I think people are going to give them credit for. And for those of you that are worried about Draisaitl and McDavid maybe not wanting to stay around for that, well, I'm gonna point this out. A lot of these NHL teams who have these really big players, like, so the biggest example would be the Pittsburgh Penguins with Crosby. Crosby is in the know for every single decision that the Penguins do end up making. Like, that is the level of seniority he's got in the Penguins organization. It's the same thing we saw. Something like that actually with the Blackhawks was a little bit dramatic, because when the Blackhawks came out with this statement that they were going to hit the rebuild button, you saw Jonathan Toews and some of the other bigger veteran players start speaking out, and they're like, what's going on? They're like, we didn't know this. But typically these are the guys that are in the know, and so we can see what happens. We haven't seen McDavid or Draisaitl do anything like that yet, so that leads me to believe that McDavid and Draisaitl know what the plan is in Edmonton, and that they've bought into it, and that they know that they're going to be the key pieces to help complete this rebuild. I don't think Oilers fans need to worry about them requesting trades with the current state of this organization. I think that they're locked in for this.
Holland may have saved that.
Oh, 100%. And Mino talked about this yesterday too. Like, if Peter Chiarelli was still the general manager of the Edmonton Oilers, you bet your boots they'd be like, we want to be out of this organization right now. Like, we talked about that. But with Mike Holland, Ken Holland, we know that the Oilers, they're going to be in a good spot. Like David and Draisaitl, they're here to stay.
Yeah.
And now Noah and I played GM once again on behalf of the Edmonton Oilers. So I'm going to pass things along to Noah, and he's going to pull up Cap Friendly.
Okay, let's hope this works, because last time it was Tyler who did this. So, yeah. All right. Here's what we have. So, obviously, I think the first thing that you'll see is that it's almost identical to what they had this year. I mean, I think we only made one extra free agent signing beyond what's already been done, who is Corey Perry. So just working down the lineup, Our first line, we have Tyler Ennis on the left wing, centered by Connor McDavid, and then we have Jesse Puljujarvi, given another chance to really shine on McDavid's right wing. Hopefully he can perform this year. That's our hope anyway. On the second line, you have Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, Leon Draisaitl, and Kyler Yamamoto. That line was dynamite, especially when Yamamoto came up into the NHL. So we'll see what happens there with that. I mean, this line really intrigues me because last year, and there's been a ton of debates about it because of Draisaitl winning the Hart. But how useful of a metric is plus minus? Like, I know this has been a conversation like going around because Leon Draisaitl, despite his pace, I think he was on pace, correct me if I'm wrong, for about 120 points this season.
Yeah, close to that.
Yeah, close to that. And he was, I think, -7 on the season. Like, when you're on pace for that many points in a season, right? Like, what happens that puts you in the minus, right? Like that's been the debate that's been going around, right? So I know Tyler and I have discussed this. I personally don't think that Leon Draisaitl should have gotten the Hart. Sorry, Oilers fans, you do passionately believe he should have, but I think that if there's an Oiler that should have gotten it, it should have been Connor McDavid this year. I mean, again, he dominated the puck. Like, his plus minus was in the positive. Like, he was good to go this year. So
yeah, well, and another thing to just add on to that, that was the other big argument about that was, how can Draisaitl win the Hart when he plays on the exact same team as Connor McDavid? And I think McDavid finished like 5th in voting or something for the Hart. Like, he was.
No, I believe that wasn't that Jacob Markstrom? Because didn't he place about the same in Hart and Vezina voting or something like that?
I don't know, but I just remember McDavid was pretty high up there. And the other argument to that too was, you had like Artemi Panarin, who was also, I think he might have been third.
Nathan McKinnon. You had both of those guys there.
But the reason I'm taking Panarin as the example is he was my personal pick, because I feel like Panarin had the same amount of impact to the Rangers as Leon Draisaitl did to the Oilers, and those were two teams that had finished with about the same record when the season had to be paused and then canceled for COVID-19 before the play-ins. But also, Panarin really had a lot less to work with in terms of a roster. Like, there was no Connor McDavid, and I think the only other really, I guess, respectable top 6 forward there that could have really been considered a high-level forward would have been Mika Zibanejad. But I really feel like Zibanejad really benefited from having, Artemi Panarin on his wing, right? And so that's where I was kind of like, dang, I really wish that Panarin would have won, because I do think Panarin, given the circumstances of the New York Rangers, people didn't expect them to do as well as they did this year, and I just feel like Panarin personally got robbed of the Hart this year.
Yeah, so obviously that was a big conversation point around Draisaitl. Working our way down the lineup even further, I think I'm really happy with the third line that we came up with. I think Kyle Turris as an addition was really good. I think that he really fills out their centers. I think he's a good third line option. And then you obviously have James Neal, because he's pretty much immovable at this point. Like, but he can produce randomly, seemingly. He'll just blow you out of the water for a few games, then he'll disappear again for the next little while. So who knows about him? Then we have Zach Kassian on the other side. And then on a fourth line, you have Joachim Nygaard. I don't know how to say his first name.
Jujhar Khaira.
Okay.
Former Prince George Spruce King.
Oh, cool. Yeah. I didn't know that, actually. So more you know. And then we have Corey Perry on the right wing on that fourth line. He played very well for Dallas in the playoffs. So that would be a very good pickup for the Oilers. Give them a bit more experience deeper in the lineup and another veteran presence. I think that would be very good.
Yeah, well, and I think this is something me and Noah and I, we talked about the other night, is with the addition of Corey Perry, that gives the Edmonton Oilers 3 quality veteran players for that bottom 6, which to me is a substantial increase for what they had last year. And I mean, we saw what happened with Dallas when they added in these veteran players. Their roster seemed to balance out more. And so when you look at the Oilers, adding these veteran pieces that can really help lead the way for these younger star players that are coming up in the pipeline, I feel like is just a no-brainer if you're the Edmonton Oilers.
All right, moving on to the defense. We have Darnell Nurse and Tyson Barrie as our first pairing. I think this is really good. I think Tyson Barrie, again, because we have Oscar Klefbom being out for the season, Tyson Barrie was a needed addition. I think he'll fill out their top pairing nicely and just give them some more offensive punch from the blue line. Our second pairing, we have Ethan Bear and Caleb Jones. What kind of surprised me with this, right, is that your second pairing is significantly cheaper than your third pairing in this roster, right? You have, and then to just explain how we have Chris Russell and Adam Larson as our third pairing guys. The sad part about this, obviously, is you have Adam Larson on your third pairing when he was brought in to be on their first pairing. Just interesting trajectories. So it'll be interesting to see what Larson can do this year. Maybe can finally kind of live up to what he was supposed to in Edmonton. I personally doubt that, but you can always hope, right? And then for goaltending, obviously you have Mikko Koskinen and Mike Smith. Just again, sense of familiarity with Smith, and I think they're hoping that Koskinen can be a starter this year. I mean, I think for them, goaltending was always going to be a difficult position to fill this offseason. I know I saw a bunch of people saying, oh, they should have gotten like Greiss, or they should have gotten this person. And it's like, but where? Like, where would you find the money to necessarily do that? And I don't know. It just doesn't seem to really make sense, right? Because isn't Greiss like 32 now or 33?
Oh, he's older than that. Like, I think he's 35.
Yeah, like he's not like he's not like a young guy. Like, why would you bring him in to be your starter at this point, right? Like, is that not what happened with Mike Smith? Like, wasn't he brought in to be the starter, and then he kind of was just started to decline, right? Like, I don't know, Grace's might be a bit better than their other options right now, but what happens like 1-2 years from now? Like, where do you end up with that?
Well, another thing I wanted to actually point out too, and I forgot to mention him earlier on in my little rant, but Konovalov, he's playing right now in Russia, like in the KHL, and he's a former third.
Oh yeah, you did forget to mention him.
I did, and I don't know why, because he's one of my favorite goalie
prospects. You spent, guys, for those of you who are listening who don't know, I believe Tyler spent half an hour talking about him last night or something like that. Like, it was crazy. I almost put Tyler on mute, actually. It was getting a little bit tiring at one point, but it is what it is.
So
keep it shorter this time, Tyler. Keep it shorter.
Anyway, he's a very talented goaltender who's playing in the KHL, and so far this season his numbers have been extremely good. So I don't think that he's too far out. I mean, these Russian goaltenders, they're proving to be very good, very quick. Like, we're looking in New York, right? The Rangers have Shesterkin and Georgiev, and like those two have been really good so far for them. And then we look Washington for like Ilya Samsonov, and then over in actually for the Islanders they have Ilya Sorokin, who's going to be on that team relatively soon as well. So
they also have Varlamov.
Yeah, but I'm just talking about like younger on the rise Russian.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm just saying there's a lot of quality Russian goaltenders in the league right now. Like, they've actually, like, I mean, Vasilevsky, like,
that's the another one too.
Like there's a few like that are really good. And then just to finish out the roster for scratches, Gaetan Haas, we have Tyler Benson and William Lageson. Yep. And then on the LTIR, as we've already mentioned, you have Oscar Klefbom, which is too bad. It would be good to see him be able to play again, but I doubt that he'll really be able to come back.
And I read somewhere too, and correct me if I'm wrong, but right now the issue with Oscar Klefbom is he's got a form of arthritis in his shoulder that he's injured multiple times.
I feel like I've seen that. I can't remember what the source was. So like, don't quote us on this, but I'm pretty sure I've seen that as well. Yeah.
And so if that's true, I believe it's going to be very unlikely that Klefbom does return to to professional hockey, because I mean I've had a hurt shoulder before, and so has my dad, and I can certainly tell you those aren't fun. But when you get arthritis in your shoulder, that ain't pretty. Like, that's going to be a tough pill to swallow. So we'll see what happens from here. But if that is the case, I think Clefbaum's career is done.
Yeah. So, we also had two other moves here. We traded Josh Archibald and a 2022 7th round pick to Detroit for a 4th rounder. And he also traded Alex Chiasson and a 5th to Minnesota for a 3rd round pick. We also we bought out Andre Skara, right? Buyouts. And then obviously there's the retained salary from Lucic, but it's pretty much the same roster as last year. There's just a few changes. We both think that they fill out the roster really nicely. I mean, the nice thing about Corey Perry, like, he isn't a top 6 forward necessarily anymore, but if you need him to step in for a game, if it's like a close game, you need a bit more experience. He's a guy, like, he also like win the Rocket Richard at one point.
Yeah, at one point.
Trophy. Yeah, like he used to be able to score goals, so you put him up on a line with Connor McDavid for a game if that's what you need. I think he could do very well there. So having a vet like Corey Perry, on the right side, just immediately makes your team that much better. So,
well, and another thing that's beneficial for having a guy like Corey Perry on your roster is he can also slot in quite comfortably on the power play as well. Like, we saw that with Dallas. I mean, I can't remember if it was on the power play, but if we want to talk about being able to show that experience can provide success, I mean, remember the overtime goal that Corey Perry scored against the Tampa Bay Lightning in the playoffs?
I think so.
So I think if you're the Oilers, you definitely want to add a guy like Corey Perry.
Yeah. So that wraps up our roster. Again, this is just in cap friendly. For those of you who maybe haven't seen it before, it's really easy to use. You can kind of make your own rosters and stuff. It's quite fun. Tyler and I didn't get to making the special teams, but I mean, I think that just depends. Like, you can predict the special teams all we want, but like based off players and what we see, but who knows, maybe Dave Tippett finds somebody else to fill a certain role, right? So, I mean, in my opinion, it's harder to predict special teams because you could say, oh yeah, these are their best offensive players, and they just might not all be able to mix super well, right? They might have conflicting styles or something. So then you need to put somebody else in there. But yeah, so I'll stop sharing the screen here. And yeah. Was there any other topic? Oh, there was other news today. I believe it was Devon Taves just signed. I think it was a 4-year deal, 4.1.
I'm pretty sure, yeah.
Yeah, 4.1 million contract. So that happened today. It wasn't the Islanders though. I'm totally blanking on the team right now. I just saw it. Yeah, Colorado. I feel so bad. Like, I just saw that. Like, I had it like written down. I'm on my screen and I just gone. No, but yeah. So I think that's a pretty good sign. I mean, that sucks for the Islanders, but.
Well, it's not too bad because the Islanders did trade his rights and they got 2 second-round picks for him. So I think it works out quite well. But definitely a bit of a bummer if you're the Islanders to trade him out because he definitely was a really, really good fit on that.
I know in the playoffs, I was actually quite impressed by him. Like, I was just impressed by the Islanders in general. Like, they stormed through the first few rounds. So,
well, one thing, I mean, you can say this for many guys on the Islanders roster, but I know I like to say specifically for Devon Taves, he's sneaky good. I think he's one of those guys that people, unless you watch him regularly, you've got no idea, like, I mean, how good he can be as a top 4 defenseman in the NHL. I definitely really liked watching him for the Islanders. So definitely a really good deal for the Avs. Locking him up for 4 years just makes the blue line that much better.
Yeah. I don't have anything else to say. So why don't you wrap this up?
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining in on the RinkMasters podcast, and make sure to follow us on Instagram, and we've got other content that we post on there pretty consistently. So definitely go check us out there.
And next week is Calgary. Just wanted to make sure that you didn't forget that. Next week, we're talking about Calgary, and we'll just be doing our overall, like, Canadian teams who did the best this offseason. Because if you follow our Instagram, we did do a post about our October power rankings, which included kind of how we thought they did in the offseason, but we didn't have like a starting point for that. So we'll kind of just walk through the Canadian teams, just who did the best this offseason. Anyways, sorry, Tyler. Just wanted to make sure you didn't forget those.
So yeah, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Instagram and Twitter. And also we're on Facebook, so give us a like, and we will see you next week for our Calgary Flames breakdown.